She married a stranger who claimed to love her, only to discover she was just part of a millionaire's cruel bet. But on their wedding night, what he did instead wasn't part of the game. Now, with her heart shattered and his soul unraveling, one question remains. Can love be real when it started with a lie? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The bar pulsed with the low throb of jazz and the clink of high-end glasses. Velvet booths lined the perimeter like secrets waiting to be kept. In the center of it all sat Ethan Vance, tailored blazer carelessly slung over one shoulder, a tumbler of whiskey dangling between his fingers, and a smirk that had broken hearts on 3 continents. "Come on, Vance," said Logan, one of his oldest and most reckless friends, tipping back his, "You've been bragging for years. Let's see you prove it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Prove what, exactly?" "That any woman can fall in love with you if you want her to. We've all heard it before." Another friend, Marcus, laughed. "Let's make it interesting. Find the poorest girl in this city, really bottom of the barrel, and marry her in 30 days. Ethan scoffed. "That's absurd, is it?" Logan challenged. He said charm is universal, that you could melt stone with a glance, so prove it. She'll never know who you are. No money, no cars, no name, just you. The silence that followed was electric. Ethan swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes glittering with reckless ego. "Deal," he said. "You pick the place, I pick the girl," and just like that, the game began. They wandered to a quiet, late-night diner after midnight, a round-down spot on the edge of downtown. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and a tired waitress in a faded apron moved from table to table, bouncing mugs of coffee with practiced wariness. Claire. She didn't notice them at first. She was focused on a crying toddler in the corner booth and an old man who kept asking for hot water refills. Her shoulders were hunched, her hair pulled back into a loose braid that had given up hours ago. Her sneakers squeaked as she moved, worn and scuffed. As she turned toward their table with a fresh pot of coffee, she tripped slightly, and a splash of the dark liquid splattered onto Ethan's crisp white shirt. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, fumbling for a napkin, her cheeks flushed crimson. Ethan blinked, startled, not by the spill, but by the fire in her eyes, the kind that came from years of exhaustion, of never having the luxury to rest or be careless. Claire didn't cower or flirt. She simply wiped the stain, apologized again, and turned away. He watched her go, something inside him tightening. "I choose her," he said. Logan choked on his drink. "You're kidding." "She's perfect," Ethan said, eyes never leaving her. "Let's begin." The next morning, Claire awoke before dawn. Her father, confined to a wheelchair since his stroke, was already awake, watching the news in the cramped living room. Her 2 younger siblings were asleep on the pull-out couch. She moved like clockwork, feeding them, packing lunches, changing into her second job's uniform. There was no room for dreams, only survival. When she got to her 3rd job at the bookstore, she noticed him again, the stranger from the diner. This time he wore an oversized hoodie and jeans. His posture was relaxed, casual, like he belonged. But his eyes followed her. He introduced himself as Ethan, said he was new in town, said he was a writer working on something he hadn't figured out yet. She offered a half smile, suspicious but too tired to ask more. He started showing up more often, at the bookstore, the diner, even at the corner market where she picked up eggs with discount coupons. Sometimes he'd help her carry groceries. Once he fixed the leaky faucet in the diner's back room. Always gentle, always quiet, never pushy. She didn't trust easily, but something about him made her want to. "You don't have to do this, you know," Ethan said one night as he walked her home in the rain. He held a broken umbrella over both of them, even as water dripped down his neck. "What? Work 3 jobs, carry the world alone?" Claire let out a dry laugh. "Who else is going to do it?" They stopped at her stoop. The lights were out, she sighed. "Sorry," she said. "Power cuts when I'm late on the bill." He reached into his jacket and handed her a small envelope. Her brows furrowed. "What is this?" "Just rent for next month, a gift." She stared at it like it might burn her fingers. "Why?" "Because you deserve at least 1 day without drowning." Claire hesitated, the pride in her spine warring with the desperation in her chest. She took it. He cooked her meals. He left paperbacks at her door with notes in the margins. Once, he brought her father his favorite crossword puzzles. Still, Claire didn't know what to make of him. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked one day. He shrugged. "Because you make the world seem real again." It happened outside the diner, where he poured down in sheets, soaking her apron, flattening her hair. Straightening there, breathless. "I know this is crazy," Ethan said, "but marry me?" She stared at him, the raindrops, but she whispered, "I want to build something with you, not out of pity, out of awe." Her heart pounded. It didn't make sense, none of it did, but something in his eyes made her feel seen. For the first time in her life, she said yes. And as they embraced, soaked to the bone, she didn't notice the phone screen that lit up in Ethan's back pocket. A message from Logan. Clocks ticking, wedding night. The rain hadn't stopped, but Claire didn't care. She stood in front of her apartment door, soaked to the skin, her hands trembling with disbelief and wonder. Ethan was still out there in the storm, his hoodie clinging to his frame, watching her with a mixture of pride and guilt he tried to bury beneath a smile. She turned around one last time before going inside. "You're really serious?" Every word. Claire closed the door slowly behind her, leaning back against the frame, heart hammering. For the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt like maybe, just maybe, someone had seen her as more than a burden, more than a tired waitress with too many bills and too little sleep. Inside, her father raised an eyebrow from his recliner. "Was that the boy from the books?" She nodded slowly, a stunned smile creeping onto her face. And Claire lowered herself to the couch and whispered, "He asked me to marry him." Her father blinked. "He did what?" "Yeah," she said, covering her face, laughing and crying at the same time. "I think I said yes." The next morning, Ethan sat in his penthouse suite, which Claire still knew nothing about. His jacket hung drawing on a gold-plated hook while his phone buzzed again and again. "Logan, you've got 2 weeks left, lover boy." "Marcus, how's the charity case? Does she snore?" Ethan tossed the phone across the room. It landed on the marble floor with a muted clack. He looked at his reflection in the massive window. His expensive clothes, the city skyline behind him, and eyes that no longer found satisfaction in their surroundings. He should have felt victorious. Instead, his stomach twisted with something he didn't recognize. He remembered the way Claire clung to her father's arm when introducing him, how she cut coupons with quiet focus, the way her face lit up when she found a discounted pack of strawberries for her siblings. She didn't deserve any of this, least of all the lie. But he told himself he'd come clean soon. Just not yet. Claire threw herself into planning a tiny wedding, too humble for a woman dreaming in survival mode. She didn't want flowers or gowns or rings she couldn't pay off in 10 years. She just wanted someone to mean it. And Ethan, he meant it, at least that's what it felt like. He offered to help with the food. He insisted on inviting her family. He cooked for her siblings one night, teaching them how to make lasagna from scratch. They adored him. When he dropped Claire off at work, he always waited outside until she waved from behind the counter. Her coworkers teased her, "Girl, you're glowing like it's Christmas morning." "I don't know what's happening," Claire admitted one night as she and her best friend folded napkins after closing. "It feels like a dream, but it's so..." Her friend smiled. "Then let yourself have this. You deserve to be loved without earning it." Claire tried to believe that. Meanwhile, Ethan avoided his friends. He stopped answering calls, ignored their group chat, spent more time in Claire's world than his own. He gave away his suits for a month, wrote poems on diner napkins, slept in the tiny guest room of Claire's apartment sometimes when her father had a rough night. And every moment, guilt simmered just beneath his skin. Every time she laughed, it twisted tighter. Every time she kissed his cheek, it whispered, "You're lying." One evening, Claire's father asked Ethan to help him outside onto the fire escape. The two men sat in the silence, watching traffic hum below. "Bees had to be, but she's fragile in places she doesn't talk about." Ethan nodded. "If you're here for real, I'll thank God every day," the man continued. "But if this is some game..." Ethan didn't answer, but his fists tightened around the metal railing. He couldn't tell the truth, not yet. Not when she looked at him like he was her future. Not when she said things like, "I feel safe when I'm with you." Not when he was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the bet had become something else. The night before the wedding, Claire sat on the roof of their apartment building, staring at the stars. Ethan joined her, placing a blanket around her shoulders. "Are you scared?" he asked gently. She nodded. Not of you, just of being happy. It feels temporary, like it'll vanish the second I blink. He tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. I'm not going anywhere. They kissed under the stars, their foreheads pressed together, the city humming beneath them. Claire didn't know that, downstairs, in Ethan's coat pocket, his phone had buzzed again. Logan's. He turned the phone off without answering. He didn't want to win anymore. He just wanted her. But the clock was still ticking, the game still existed, and on the morning of their wedding, Ethan stood in front of the mirror of a borrowed suit in Claire's bathroom, heart pounding, throat tight, wondering how he'd let this happen, how he'd gone from smug rich kid playing a cruel game to a man who'd give up every dollar just to hear her say, "I do." The door creaked open behind him. Claire stood in a dress she'd sewn from thrifted fabric, her smile nervous but radiant. "You ready?" she whispered. Ethan swallowed. "Not even close," he whispered back. "But I'd do this 1,000 times just to be with you." She took his hand, and they walked out together into a future built on secrets, on borrowed time, and on the fragile hope that somehow love could be real even when it started with a lie. The city hall was quiet, almost indifferent, as Claire stepped through its cold double doors. Her borrowed white dress was a size too big and clung awkwardly to her slim frame, the lace at her shoulders yellowed with age. It had once belonged to a neighbor who had long since given up on love. Claire had never imagined this moment for herself, especially not like this. No flowers, no music, no family. A signature, a vow, and the man who had appeared in her life like a miracle and swept her into a whirlwind she hadn't dared question. Ethan stood beside her, looking effortlessly polished even in the plain gray suit he claimed was his only one. He wore no tie, only a silver button pin at his lapel. Claire had asked about it once, and he'd said it reminded him of humility. But standing next to her now, she noticed something else. His eyes weren't as bright, his smirk not as easy. There was a tightness to his jaw, a weight he tried to hide behind charm, but Claire didn't know that weight had a name: guilt. When the officiant asked if they were ready, Claire hesitated for a second, not because she was unsure of him, but because she couldn't believe someone like him had truly chosen her. She glanced at his hand as it reached for hers, and something in her heart softened. "I do," she whispered. Ethan's voice was steady, too steady. "I do." And with that, the lie became law. They exited City Hall under cloudy skies. Rain threatened, but never came. Ethan hailed a cab and held the door open for her. Claire sat beside him in silence, her fingers wrapped tightly around a small paper bouquet her sister had made from old magazines. She stared out the window, her eyes reflecting uncertainty, while Ethan stared at her profile, wondering what kind of man he was becoming. They didn't go to a hotel or a honeymoon. Ethan had rented a modest one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, furnished with a borrowed couch, soft lighting, and a stack of library books on the coffee table. It was cozy and thoughtful, the kind of space Claire never expected someone like him to think of. She turned to him slowly as they stepped inside, her voice barely audible. "I didn't expect all this. You deserve at least..." They stood in the living room as awkward silence wrapped around them. Claire ran her hand along the back of the couch, then looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the thin gold band on her finger. I should change out of this," she said, nodding toward the dress. Her cheeks were flushed, though she wasn't sure if it was embarrassment or nerves. Ethan nodded. "Of course, take your time." She stepped into the small bedroom and closed the door behind her. Her heart pounded in her chest. The moment she'd dreamed about, little of it she had allowed herself to imagine, was now real. But it wasn't like the movies. There were no rose petals or violins, no whispered promises or slow kisses, just uncertainty. She wasn't afraid of Ethan, not in the slightest, but she was afraid of being wrong. When she emerged 10 minutes later, she wore a soft gray nightdress and clutched a sweater to her chest. Ethan had changed too, just a t-shirt and sweatpants, looking like a man about to watch TV, not one who had just gotten married. Claire stood near the kitchen island, then took a small breath. "There's something you should know," she said. Ethan turned, heart pounding, afraid he'd been found out. I've never been with anyone before." Her voice cracked. "I know that's probably not what you expected, but I didn't want you to think I was someone I'm not." He froze, the air seemed to thicken. He hadn't prepared for this. Not this kind of honesty, not this kind of vulnerability. Claire swallowed, eyes flicking to the floor. "I don't want to disappoint you." Ethan walked toward her slowly, every step like wading through wet concrete. His hand reached up and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear she didn't know had fallen. "You could never disappoint me," he whispered. She blinked. "You're not upset?" "Honored," he said softly. "And ashamed that I came into your life the way I did." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He paused, then smiled quickly, brushing it off. "Nothing, just, I didn't expect to care this much." Claire stepped into his arms. "Then don't stop." He didn't kiss her. He didn't lay a hand on her beyond the embrace. Instead, he held her tightly, like a man anchoring himself to something good, something pure. She rested her head against his chest, her eyes slowly drifting shut, and eventually, in the quiet of that modest apartment, Claire fell asleep in the arms of a man who had promised her everything. Ethan didn't sleep. He lay awake long after the city's lights had dimmed and the world outside had gone still. Claire's steady breath rose and fell beside him. The scent of her hair, like lavender and rain, clung to the pillow. He stared at the ceiling, where shadows from the street lamp danced faintly across the plaster. The memory crept in again. That night when his father humiliated his mother at a corporate gala, mocking her publicly before disappearing in the hallway while paparazzi flashed their. It had never left him, and now, here he was, standing at the edge of becoming the very man he swore he'd never be. A liar, a coward, a fool. His phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. A single message from Damien, the ringleader of the bet. Clocks ticking. Wedding night's coming. Ethan stared at it, hatred boiling in his chest. Not for Damien, but for himself. For letting it get this far, for not stopping when he saw her eyes, her life, her soul. For letting something fake get so dangerously close to real. He switched the phone off and turned to look at her. She looked so small curled up beside him, so small and so fragile all at once. He reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered so quietly it got lost in the sound of the air vent. But even in the silence, it was the first honest thing he'd said all day. Claire stirred just once during the night, shifting to press her hand gently to his chest. As if even in sleep, she trusted him. The next morning, Ethan woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. The space next to him was empty, the covers folded neatly. For a moment, panic shot through him. But then he saw it, a small piece of paper left on the pillow. In looping handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for being different." Ethan sat on the bed, the note trembling in his hands. And for the first time in years, he wished desperately that it were true. Ethan folded Claire's note slowly, like it was something sacred. Her words, so simple, so sincere, cut deeper than any accusation could have. "Thank you for being different." But he wasn't different. He had done this for a laugh, for a bet, and now he was married to the one woman who actually believed he was good. He walked into the kitchen, still holding the note, and saw Claire already preparing breakfast. She wore an old apron with a faded cartoon character, and her hair was tied in a messy bun. She was humming. He paused in the doorway, watching her, something twisting inside him. She turned and smiled. "Hey, sleepyhead, hope you like eggs and burnt toast. It's kind of my specialty." He chuckled, though it caught in his throat. "Smells like five-star cuisine to me." She slid the plate onto the table and sat across. Her eyes searched his face with quiet curiosity. "Did you sleep okay?" "I did," he lied. "You?" She shrugged. "Took a while. I kept thinking it was all a dream." Ethan swallowed. "Good dream or bad one?" "Good," she said softly. "Too good, maybe." He looked down at his plate. The toast was, in fact, slightly burnt. But he ate it all, not because he was hungry, but because she made it. And something about that mattered more than anything he'd done in months. They finished breakfast. Claire reached into a small box near the sink and pulled out a tiny, hand-wrapped gift. "What's that?" he asked. "I wanted to give you something," she said, shyly placing it in his hand. "Silly, but I made it weeks ago, before I even thought you'd propose." Ethan slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a keychain, hand-stitched with felt. It had a tiny stitched book on one side and a little house on the other. "For your keys," she explained. "One side is because you're always writing, and the other because I hope someday you feel like you have a home." His heart slammed against his chest. He looked up, his mouth dry. "Claire, I know it's not much." "No, it's everything." She blushed and stood to clean up, but he caught her wrist gently. "Claire," she froze. "I just want you to know, I don't take this lightly. You, us, this." Her eyes shimmered. I know you don't. But did she? If she knew the truth, she wouldn't be looking at him like that. Later that day, Ethan stepped out to grab groceries. He needed air, he needed to think. We walked for blocks, passing busy streets, the hum of city life masking the chaos in his mind. When he finally stopped, it was in front of an old church. The doors were open, and he wandered in. It was quiet, nearly empty. A few candles flickered near the altar. He sat in the last pew, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I don't know what to do, he whispered. He remembered how his mother used to pray. She'd light a candle every Sunday morning, praying not for wealth or favor, but for strength, for peace. He hadn't stepped into a church since her funeral. He closed his eyes and let the silence sit around him. Then his phone buzzed. It was a photo from Damien. A photo of Ethan and Claire leaving City Hall, holding hands. The caption read, "One down, just wait till she finds out." Ethan's blood turned cold. He knew what this meant. The others were watching, waiting, laughing. His fingers trembled as he deleted the message. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe he could stop the damage from spreading further. When he returned home, Claire was folding laundry on the couch, humming to herself again. She looked up and smiled. Hey, I was starting to think you got lost. He smiled, forcing calm. Just needed some air. She nodded. Everything okay? He wanted to say no. He wanted to spill the whole truth, but instead he crossed the room, wrapped his arms around her, and held her tightly. I'm just lucky, he whispered. She didn't ask what he meant. She just held him back. That night, they curled up on the couch with blankets and an old movie. Claire fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, and Ethan stared at the ceiling again, trapped in a prison of his own making. The next morning, Claire wasn't there when he woke. He wandered into the kitchen and saw a fresh cup of coffee and another note on the counter. Out job hunting, rent's due next week. Don't worry, I'm not disappearing. He read the note twice, then 3 times. His heart twisted. She was trying so hard to contribute, to be an equal partner in something that was never supposed to be real. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the contract he'd hidden, proof of the bet. He stared at it, his jaw clenched. It was time. That evening, he returned home before Claire and hid the contract in a box beneath the bed. He couldn't destroy it, not yet, but he couldn't look at it anymore either. Claire arrived soon after, flushed and tired. She kicked off her shoes and smiled. Guess who got an interview at the diner on 8th? Ethan's eyes lit up. That's amazing, she laughed. Don't get too excited. It's just dishes and maybe some prep work, but it's everything, he said. They had dinner, simple pasta and garlic bread. She talked about her siblings, her father, her dream. He listened, every word another brick on the wall of his guilt. When she got up to wash dishes, Ethan stepped outside onto the tiny balcony. The city stretched out before him. Lights glittered like stars, but none of it felt beautiful. He pulled out his phone and opened a message thread to Damien. Ethan, it's over. I'm out. Don't ever contact me again. He hit send, blocked the number, deleted every photo, every screenshot, every piece of evidence that this had ever been a game. Claire stepped out behind him a few minutes later and wrapped her arms around his waist. Everything okay? She asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. Yeah, he said, watching the city lights. Everything's finally starting to make sense. She leaned closer. Like what? Like maybe, just maybe, I didn't meet you by accident. Claire laughed softly. I hope not. I've never believed in luck. He turned and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips. Neither of them said it yet, but in that moment they both felt it. Something real, something dangerous. Something that could either save them or shatter them completely. The charity event glimmered with wealth and polished charm. High ceilings draped in chandeliers, servers gliding across the marble floor, and a violin quartet playing in the corner. Claire stood beside Ethan, her thrifted navy dress modest against the sea of designer gowns. Still, Ethan kept his hand on the small of her back, anchoring her like she belonged. But Olivia Hartley saw everything. From across the room, Olivia's lips curled into a slow, calculated smile as she sipped her champagne. She hadn't seen Ethan in months, not since their engagement crumbled in public scandal. And now, here he was, parading a poor girl through high society as if rewriting his legacy was as simple as switching accessories. She crossed the room with quiet elegance, stopping just beside Ethan and Claire. Ethan, she said coolly. He turned stiffly. Olivia? Claire offered a polite smile. Hi, I'm Claire. I know, Olivia purred, eyes glinting. You're the new friend. The word landed heavy. Claire's expression faltered, but Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. "Excuse us, Olivia," he said through clenched teeth. But Olivia wasn't done. "I'll only take a moment of your time, Ethan. Alone." Claire hesitated, searching his eyes, then nodded. "I'll wait by the balcony." Olivia led him to a quiet alcove near the powder room. Her tone dropped, her eyes sharpening. "You really think this waitress can clean the blood off your name?" Ethan flinched. "She has nothing to do with that." "Oh, but she does now," Olivia whispered, stepping closer, "because your friends still talk loudly about the little game you're playing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It's not a game anymore." Olivia arched a brow. "So it's true then? You married her on a bet." His silence said everything. "I should ruin you," she spat, voice trembling with rage. "But I won't. I'll give you a choice. Walk away from her, disappear, or I'll tell her everything myself." Ethan looked down, ashamed. "Do you care?" "Because I once loved you, and I know how deep your cruelty can cut." He ran a hand through his hair, pain flashing across his face. "You don't understand." "No," she snapped. "I do. I understand better than she ever will." As Olivia walked away, Ethan remained frozen. The walls of the room seemed to close in around him, suffocating him with guilt. Back on the balcony, Claire stood in the cool air, her fingers gripping the railing. When Ethan returned, he wrapped an arm around her, forcing a smile. "What did she want?" she asked softly. "Nothing important," he lied. "Just closure." Claire studied him for a moment but said nothing. Instead, she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Let's go home." But Olivia wasn't finished. A week later, Claire sat in the hospital lobby, waiting to pick up her father's prescription. She wore her work uniform and clutched a warm cup of coffee between her palms. She didn't notice Olivia until the woman slid onto the seat beside her like a ghost. "Claire?" she greeted sweetly. Claire blinked. "Olivia." "Small world," she mused, crossing her legs elegantly. "I was just here visiting my grandmother." Claire nodded politely, unsure what else to say. Olivia's gaze swept over her. "You look tired. Working late again?" Claire nodded. "Yeah, double shifts lately." "You're a hard worker," Olivia said. "That must be what Ethan finds." Claire's brow creased. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't mind me." Olivia smiled wider, her voice gentle. "It's just, men like Ethan, they get bored easily, but you know that, right?" Claire stiffened. "I don't think I understand what you're implying." Olivia's tone softened, almost pitying. "You'd be surprised what rich men are capable of, darling." Claire's stomach twisted. With a wink and a soft laugh, Olivia stood up and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Claire frozen in her seat. Later that night, Claire stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair slowly. Ethan watched her from the doorway. "You okay?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Just tired?" But as he kissed her cheek and wished her good night, she stared at her reflection a moment longer, searching for cracks in a dream that suddenly felt too perfect. Something was wrong, and her heart, no matter how much it longed to believe in him, couldn't silence the whisper of doubt Olivia had. 2 days later, Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at the same text thread he hadn't dared to delete. The last message from his friend still glowed like a taunt. "Clock's ticking, wedding night's come and gone. What now, lover boy?" He should have deleted it, buried it, but part of him needed the reminder of the line he crossed, the pain he'd caused. Claire was sleeping in their bedroom just a few feet away, and yet he'd never felt further from her. His thumb hovered over the screen. Delete it, burn it all down. Instead, he locked the phone and left it face down. Next morning, Claire was quiet at breakfast. She pushed scrambled eggs around her plate while Ethan read the paper, pretending not to notice her stolen glances. She finally spoke. "Did you love her?" He looked up. "What? Olivia?" Ethan set down his fork. "That was a long time ago. That's not what I asked," he sighed. "I thought I did, but it was all status, approval, control. Never love." Claire nodded, her lips. Ethan's shoulders tensed. "Like what?" Claire met his eyes. "That men like you get bored easily. That I should be careful." A long silence stretched between them. "She doesn't know me," he finally said. "Not anymore." "But she did once," Claire replied. "Better than I do, maybe." He stood, unsure whether to reach for her or let her go. "If you ever doubt me," Claire asked me, not her. She nodded, but her eyes remained clouded. That afternoon, Ethan visited his mother's grave. A rare trip, a place he avoided like it held his shame. But today, he needed to remember who he once was, before the money, before the walls, before the cruelty disguised as charm. "I married someone," he said aloud. "And I'm terrified." The wind carried the scent of rain and the sound of distant city traffic. I told myself it started as a joke, a stupid bet, but she's not a game. She's the first person who makes me want to stop running. He paused, empowered, and got some help. From Murphy, the New York Times. She opened it and wrote the notebook Ethan had left on the kitchen counter. Curious, she opened it. Inside were dozens of handwritten pages, letters he never sent, thoughts he never voiced, and in the middle, one entry circled in ink. "I don't deserve her, but maybe that's what makes it real." Claire's hands trembled as she flipped to another page, one dated 2 days before their wedding. What if she finds out? What if she forgives me? What if I don't forgive myself? Claire closed the notebook slowly, her heart racing. When Ethan returned home that evening, she was waiting on the couch. "I read your journal," she said quietly. He froze. "I shouldn't have, but I did." He sat beside her, eyes full of shame. "Then you know." Tears rimmed her eyes. "I don't know everything. I need you to tell me out loud." So he did. Every detail. The bar, the dare, the choice, the guilt, the moment it stopped being a bet and started being a prayer. By the end, Claire's hands were clenched in her lap and her shoulders were shaking. "I wanted to hate you," she whispered. "I still might. I understand, but part of me," she looked up, pain carved deep into her face. "Part of me wanted this to be real so badly that I ignored every sign." Ethan reached for her hand. She let him. "It became real," he said. "Too late, maybe. But it did." Claire stood slowly, voice breaking. "I need time." He nodded. "Take it." That night, Ethan slept on the couch, haunted by silence. Meanwhile, Olivia sat by her fireplace, sipping red wine, eyes fixed on her phone. She had no message from Ethan, no update, nothing. Yet something in her face, equal parts satisfaction and sadness, broke in them, and somehow, it didn't feel like victory. At the same time, Claire stood outside the diner in her uniform, the wind catching her apron strings. The city lights blurred through the tears in her eyes. A customer called her name from the doorway, but she didn't move. Her whole world had shifted, and she didn't know if she'd ever find footing again. But somewhere inside her, past the betrayal, past the pain, a seed of something still pulsed. Hope and fear, both tangled tightly, like her heart didn't know which it wanted more. Claire never meant to snoop. She was cleaning the kitchen while Ethan was out on a call, the remnants of their takeout dinner still warm on the counter. His phone buzzed on the table beside her. She glanced at the screen without meaning to. A message preview from someone named Trent flashed. "Bro, 3 days left?" She picked up the phone. Eth heard the hesitancy of a dream. Trembling. She knew she shouldn't, but something inside her whispered that the pieces didn't fit, and they hadn't for a while. Message thread opened with a sickening ease. Dozens of texts between Ethan and his friends, mocking bets, playful dares, laughter over drink. Flooded the screen. It started a month ago. Trent had written, "Pick someone hopeless, someone who wouldn't even see it coming." Ethan's reply, "Already found her. Sweet girl spilled a drink on me. Looks like she hasn't slept in weeks. You'll believe anything." Claire's heart pounded in her chest. Thunder behind her ribcage. The walls around her blurred. Her knees threatened to give way beneath her. Her hand flew to her mouth as bile rose in her throat. She stumbled back from the counter, knocking over a glass. It shattered. Sound tore through the silence like a scream. Ethan entered moments later, laughing at something he heard on the phone. He froze at the sight of her glass on the floor. Her face paled, her fingers clenched around his phone. Claire's eyes met his, and he knew instantly. "What is this?" Her voice shook with fury and heartbreak. "What is this, Ethan?" He stepped forward. "Claire, I can explain. No more lies, no more soft words and dinners and fake sympathy." He reached for her and she pulled back like he'd burned her. "Was I ever anything more than a joke to you?" she asked, voice cracking as either stupid, drunken bet. "It started as a joke, yes, a stupid, drunken bet. But it's not what it is now. Claire, I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "You didn't mean for it?" she echoed bitterly. "Didn't mean to fake your entire identity? Didn't mean to get me to fall for you so your friends could have a laugh?" He flinched at the venom in her voice. "I never thought I'd fall in love," he said softly. Claire's expression shattered. "You didn't fall in love, Ethan. You fell into guilt." She slapped him. The sound echoed. His cheek turned red, but he looked at her with nothing but regret. Tears ran down her face, each one a drop of betrayal. She stepped away, her breath ragged. "I let myself believe again," she whispered. "After everything I've been through. After everything I swore I'd never let anyone do to me again." "Claire, please," he begged. She stared at him, and then, without a word, she walked into the bedroom. A few minutes later, she emerged with a duffel bag and her keys. She didn't cry anymore. Her face was set like stone. "Don't follow me," she said. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere. I'm not a bit." She walked past him, pausing only to place something gently on the entryway table. Ethan didn't see what it was until the door clicked shut behind her. It was her necklace. Tiny, worn, silver. The one she said belonged to her mother, the only thing she had left after they lost everything. Now, she didn't even want that reminder connected to him. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the apartment, her necklace cold in his hand. The silence roared in his ears, louder than the slap, louder than her footsteps walking away. He wanted to chase her, but he didn't even know where she'd go. He sank onto the couch, phone beside him, the cruel messages staring back at him like a mirror. He hated that version of himself, the man who thought charm was currency, that love could be a wager. Claire had walked into his world with nothing, yet she had given him everything real, and he had broken it. He called her, no answer. He texted, nothing. The hours crawled into the next morning. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He checked the shelter, the diner, even the hospital her father frequented. No one had seen her. It was like she'd vanished. He returned to the apartment that night and noticed her bedroom door ajar. He sat on her bed. Everything was still there. Her pillow still smelled like her shampoo. A small journal peeked out from under her blanket. He flipped through it. Her handwriting was delicate, slanted. There were little notes, grocery lists, prayers for her siblings, and one page that made his throat close. "I didn't know it was possible to feel safe in someone's arms again. But last night, I think I did." Ethan shut the journal and buried his face in his hands. Claire, meanwhile, wasn't sleeping. She sat on the edge of an old twin bed in a rundown room above a friend's bodega. Her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea. Her eyes were swollen, her lips cracked from biting down her sobs all night. She hadn't gone far, just somewhere Ethan wouldn't look. As dawn broke, she caught her reflection in the tiny cracked mirror across the room. She barely recognized herself. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was the reawakening of something buried long ago. That night, when she found the messages on Ethan's phone, something had cracked in her chest, not just her heart, but a vault. One she'd sealed tightly as a child. The little brother was encased in braves to protect her brother. The little brother at home stood near her, her little brother, in their trailer home. Claire had taken his drunken wrath to she'd hidden in a closet, hand over her brother's mouth, trying to keep him silent while glass shattered outside. That was the night she decided to trust no one who smiled too easily. No man who said the right things. But Ethan had made her forget that rule. And now, her childhood scars stung again. Her phone vibrated. A text from Ethan. "You don't have to forgive me, just let me make it right. Let me find—" She turned the phone off and tossed it onto the mattress. Later that afternoon, she walked 2 miles to her sister's daycare center to leave cash in an envelope at the front desk. She didn't want her siblings involved. Not in the storm of headlines that would erupt if the truth ever came out. He picked it up, held it like it might dissolve, and he whispered, "Claire, I'm so sorry." Then he walked to the balcony, the wind rushing around him, the city glittering below. Somewhere out there, she was hurting, and he had put that look in her eyes. But he wasn't done fighting, not for her. Not yet. And she knew it would. Olivia's words echoed in her head. You'd be surprised what rich men are capable of. She didn't trust Ethan, not anymore. And yet, the image of him holding her the night of their wedding haunted her. He hadn't touched her, hadn't crossed a line. That night he was gentle, real, but was it guilt? She didn't know. All she knew was the ache that refused to leave her chest. Ethan, meanwhile, wasn't sitting still. He had his team comb through camera footage, GPS data, even asked friends in the press to keep their ears open. No one knew where Claire had gone. He returned to the shelter where she once stayed. The woman behind the desk shook her head. She came by yesterday, left some money and food, said not to tell anyone where she went. Is she okay? Ethan asked, his voice ragged. She used to be tall. You break a girl like that, you might never get her back. That night, Ethan sat alone in the penthouse. Her shoes were still by the door. Her laugh still echoed in the walls. Her coffee mug, chipped and plain, sat in the sink. Sipping chamomile tea in quiet solidarity. Now, in the silence of the cooling bakery, Claire finally slid the letter from her apron pocket and unfolded it. Claire, I don't know if you'll ever read this, maybe I don't deserve that, but I needed you to know. I loved you too late to deserve you. But I'm trying now. I thought I was better than the man who made the bet. I thought pretending to be kind would make me kind, but then I met you and the pretending stopped. Everything else did too. I lost you because I couldn't tell the truth in time, and maybe you'll never forgive me, but I'll still become the kind of man who deserves the love you gave me, even if I never feel it again. Ethan, she folded the letter back up, slowly, pressing the crease like it would smooth out the ache in her chest. She didn't cry. She had already done that in the shelter's bathroom, once, muffled against the tile. Claire hadn't responded. She didn't know if she could. Next morning was cloudy, the kind of sky that never committed to rain. Claire arrived at the bakery early, hair tucked under her knit cap, and tied her apron before the sun peeked through the window. Around noon, a man entered, older, with tired eyes and a cane that clicked gently on the tiled floor. He asked for a raisin bun, and Claire's hands stilled when she heard the voice. "Claire?" he said softly. She turned. "Dad?" Her father stood in front of her, thinner than she remembered, but smiling all the same. "Your boss told me where you were. I didn't mean to interrupt your shift. They sat in the small staff room, stale coffee between them, and Claire looked at him, truly looked. His cheeks were sunken, but his gaze was clear. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the knuckles that had meted so many silent mornings. "I had a visitor yesterday," he said. Claire froze. "Who?" Young man, tall, looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Brought me groceries and an envelope full of insurance forms." Her father chuckled quietly. "Said he was a friend of yours." Claire didn't speak. "I may be old, but I'm not blind. I know who he was. I saw the way his hands shook when he asked if I was in pain, and the way he looked at your picture on the fridge." Her father paused. "That boy's a fool," but his eyes were begging for forgiveness. Claire's throat tightened. "The pain for my surgery," her father added softly. "Didn't want you to know. Said it wasn't about earning back your love, just doing something right." Claire pressed a hand to her heart, the heat of her palm no match for the sudden swell of emotion. "He asked for nothing in return, Claire, not even your name." Later that night, she walked back to the shelter slower than usual. The city buzzed around her buzzhorns, faint laughter, a violinist playing somewhere in the underground station, but inside her, a strange quiet had settled. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't something she could offer like a clean slate. But maybe, just maybe, it was something she could begin to consider. When she returned to her room, she took out Ethan's letter again. This time, she read it aloud. Each word felt like a step across a cracked bridge. Fragile, unsure, but necessary. The next day, she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She bought a new notebook, and on the first page she wrote, "I'm not ready to forgive you, but I see you trying, and that matters." She didn't sign it. She didn't send it. But she placed the notebook in her bag, just in case. And for the first time in a long time, Claire smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because she had finally taken one small step forward. The following afternoon, Ethan stood outside the bakery in silence, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He hadn't planned to come. He'd told himself the letter was enough, that if she wanted to find him, she would. But seeing her through the glass window, laughing to a coworker as she arranged fresh loaves, did something to him. She looked okay, not happy, not broken, just surviving. And that in itself was a miracle. Ethan didn't go inside. He left a small box with the manager, no name on the wrapping, only a ribbon and a card inside that read, "You once said you didn't believe in luck, but I still do, and I hope it finds you even if it doesn't lead you back to me." Claire opened it that night and found inside a charm bracelet. Handmade, nothing flashy, no diamonds. Each charm was symbolic. A tiny bread loaf, a heart wrapped in bandages, a small compass. She didn't cry, but her hand lingered on the compass. At the shelter, word had spread quietly about the mystery man who donated $10,000 under the name "In Honor of Claire." A counselor mentioned it in passing, and Claire had simply nodded. She wasn't ready to talk about Ethan, not yet. But she couldn't stop the memories from creeping in when she was alone. His bad jokes, the way he had cooked pasta and almost set off the smoke alarm. The quiet nights when he just held her hand without asking for more. He hadn't been faking those moments. She could feel it now. But it didn't erase the lie. Days turned into weeks. One evening, while closing the bakery, Claire stepped out to take the trash and found an elderly woman struggling with a shopping cart on the sidewalk. The wheel had jammed, and the bag of apples inside had split open. Claire didn't think. She ran to help. Kneeling on the cold pavement, she scooped up the fruit, one by one. The woman smiled through wrinkled eyes. "You remind me of my granddaughter, always helping strangers." Claire paused. It just seemed like the right thing to do. The woman's words stayed with her all the way home. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Maybe doing the right thing wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about choosing not to let it poison the future. Across town, Ethan sat in his office. The lights dimmed, the walls lined with charity brochures. His company had shifted its focus. More outreach programs, more investment in community centers, less in yachts and private jets. He no longer answered his old friend group's calls. The ones who used to laugh with him now looked at him like he was infected with guilt. Maybe he was. Olivia had tried to show up once at his office. He didn't let her in. "You already did your damage," he'd said through the speakerphone. Now his only distraction was rebuilding things Claire might care about. Sponsoring the bakery to cater at his next fundraiser, funding surgery for her father anonymously. But still, no word from her. Until one night, a small white envelope arrived at his apartment door. No return address, no handwriting, just his name. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her words short, raw, and powerful. "I'm not ready to forgive you, but I see you trying, and that matters." He held the paper like it was made of glass. It wasn't much, it wasn't everything, but it was something. The next morning, Ethan stood outside the bakery again. He didn't have a speech prepared. He didn't bring flowers or diamonds or apologies. He brought bread, fresh, warm, still wrapped in parchment. He'd baked it himself that morning at the Outreach Center's new culinary program. Claire was at the register. When she saw him, her body tensed. Their eyes locked, and for a second the city disappeared. Ethan stepped inside. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said, voice steady. "Just thought I'd return the favor." He handed her the loaf. She took it, slowly. The air between them pulsed with everything unsaid. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Was it hard?" she asked softly. He turned back. "What? Becoming someone you can live with." His smile was tired but real. "Harder than I thought, but maybe that means I'm finally doing it right." She nodded. Her hand rested on the counter. "I still don't know what this means." Ethan didn't flinch. "You don't have to. I'll wait, even if it means I never get an answer." He walked away, but for the first time, she watched him go, not with pain, but with possibility. That night, Claire sat in the shelter's tiny library and stared at the note he'd once written. She unfolded it again, read it twice, and placed it next to her own. 2 letters, 2 hearts breaking, 2 souls learning how to rebuild. Forgiveness wasn't a destination, it was a road, and she had just taken her second step. The courtroom was colder than Claire remembered courtrooms being. Not from experience, she'd never been inside one, but from the movies she used to sneak watch on late-night TV when sleep felt impossible. This one was sterile and impersonal, like a stage without lighting. The polished floor, the stiff wooden benches, the dull murmur of reporters and observers, it all seemed surreal. She sat near the back, a plain black hoodie pulled over her head, glasses perched low on her nose, hair tied back so tightly it tugged at her scalp. No one paid her any mind. To them, she was just another curious stranger, not the girl who once wore a borrowed wedding dress and believed in a stranger's lies. The judge called the session to order. Cameras weren't allowed, but that didn't stop the swarm of journalists who waited like vultures just outside the courthouse steps. Olivia sat at the front with her legal team, poised, elegant, untouchable. Her tailored blazer hugged her figure like armor. Her lips were painted the same blood-red Claire remembered from that day at the hospital. She watched Ethan enter. He looked tired, not physically. His suit was crisp, his hair groomed, but his eyes held a hollow weight, the kind that told stories of sleepless nights and burned bridges. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. Something about him felt less performative now, as if the boy who once strutted through bars had been carved down to a man who had tasted guilt too bitter to. The case had drawn media frenzy. Olivia suing Ethan for defamation after he exposed a series of bribery and misconduct she committed while managing nonprofit gala funds. Ethan had hired a private investigator, not to hurt Olivia, but to clean up his own mess. And when the findings were published, Olivia struck back with everything she had. The prosecution began with Olivia's attorney painted Ethan as a bitter ex-lover, bent on revenge after being dumped for someone with real ambition. Claire stiffened. Lies dressed in confidence were still lies. Then came Ethan's turn. He was called to the stand. Claire leaned forward slightly. Her fingers clutched the edge of the wooden bench. The bailiff swore him in. The oath settled in the air like dust. The attorney for Ethan's defense asked the first question. "Mr. Vance, would you describe your relationship with Miss Olivia Wexler?" Ethan paused. "We were engaged once, years ago. What ended it? She wanted a legacy. I wanted escape from ghosts." A few murmurs fluttered from the gallery. "And what prompted you to investigate Miss Wexler's financial dealings?" Another pause, this time heavier. "I was changing. Someone I loved made me look in the mirror. I didn't like what I saw." The attorney tilted his head. "Are you saying this investigation was motivated by guilt?" "No." Ethan's voice lowered but carried. "It was motivated by truth. For the first time, I wanted to do something right without asking what I'd get in return." Claire swallowed hard. "Let's talk about this person who changed you. Is she here today?" "I don't know," Ethan said quietly. "But I hope so." "And is it true there was a bet?" The courtroom tensed. Ethan closed his eyes for a breath. "Yes, there was." Whispers sparked instantly around the room. Claire's stomach flipped. "I was drunk," Ethan continued. "Stupid. I bragged to my friends that I could get any woman to fall for me. They dared me to marry someone they thought wasn't worthy of me. I picked Claire." The name echoed through the silence. "But then," he said, voice cracking, "she wasn't who I expected. She was better, stronger, kinder. She wasn't a challenge, she was a mirror, and I broke her." The judge banged the gavel once, silencing the whisper. "Do you love her?" the defense attorney asked. "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "And did you love her during the bet?" "I think I started to, but I didn't deserve to say it then." Claire's vision blurred. "And now? I love her enough to admit everything, even if she never forgives me." The defense rested. Then, Olivia's attorney stood and launched into a cold dissection of Ethan's testimony, twisting motives, painting him as vindictive, accusing him of leveraging charity to erase a guilty conscience. Olivia never looked at Ethan during any of it, but she stole glances toward the audience, her gaze drifting over Claire's section once, sharp as a needle. By the time the session broke for lunch, the courtroom emptied in a flurry of heels, suits, and murmurs. Ethan walked out alone. Claire didn't know what possessed her, but she followed. Outside, the sky was overcast. The crowd of reporters was already pressing in. Ethan paused on the steps, still unaware she was behind him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a single red rose. Claire stepped forward. He turned, startled, and then recognition. His mouth parted slightly, breath caught. She said nothing, just reached out and took the rose from his hand. The reporters froze. Click, click. The world around them spun in chaos, but in that moment it was silent. Claire stared into his eyes and saw it. Not just guilt, not just regret. She saw truth, and something fragile beginning again. The crowd didn't. Not right away. They were stunned, hungry for drama, but unsure what they'd just witnessed. A millionaire with a scandalous past, standing in silence, handing a rose to a woman who vanished months ago. And now she stood before him, not shouting, not crying, just holding the single red rose like it was the most delicate truth in the world. Claire didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat tightened under the pressure of everything unsaid. Her fingers clenched around the stem, a soft tremble in her hands. Ethan stood frozen. Every breath he took looked like it might collapse him. He wasn't hiding behind charm or bravado anymore. He looked like a man stripped to the core. She finally stepped closer. No makeup, no pretense, just Claire. "You spoke the truth in there," she said softly, barely loud enough for him to hear over the reporters clicking away. "I owed it to you," he said, voice low, thick with emotion. "Even if it cost me everything." Her eyes searched his. "Why now?" "Because I lost you, and losing you taught me what love really is. It's not winning, it's surrender." Claire closed her eyes. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But she had needed to hear that, not just as a woman who had been betrayed, but as someone who wanted to believe people could change. Behind them, the flashes grew relentless. Journalists shouted questions, microphones jutted forward, but neither of them moved. Ethan stepped closer. "I never asked you for a second chance. I don't deserve one. But if you're here just to return this," he gestured to the rose. "I understand." Claire shook her head. "I'm here because I needed to see if you'd really changed." She looked down at the rose, then back at him. "You have, but it's not enough for me to come running back. I need time. I need space." His nod was almost reverent. "You can have all of it. I just wanted you to know I meant every word." Claire gave him a long look, then stepped aside and disappeared into the crowd. The cameras followed her, but Ethan didn't. He didn't chase her. He simply turned back toward the courthouse steps, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer than they'd been in months. Inside, the trial resumed after luncheon. Olivia took the stand. She painted herself as the victim, denied all wrongdoing, claimed Ethan's investigation was a vendetta fueled by jealousy and bitterness. But the evidence said otherwise. Bank records, misappropriated funds, falsified event totals. Ethan's investigator had done his job well. Piece by piece, her web unraveled. The judge listened carefully, but even as Olivia's facade cracked under pressure, the real battle for Ethan was never about winning. It was about standing in front of the world, stripped of lies, and finally saying, "I was wrong." And he had done that. The verdict was postponed until the next day, but the public had already made theirs. Outside the courtroom that evening, a few bystanders applauded as Ethan exited. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a cheer, but it was something. He looked out toward the street, wondering where Claire had gone, hoping she'd gotten home safely, hoping she'd hold on to the rose a little longer than she planned to. Claire sat on a park bench a few blocks away, the rose beside her. The courthouse dome shimmered in the distance under the evening sun. She watched people pass by, heads down, phones in hand, living their own stories. She hadn't planned to come today. In fact, she'd almost turned around twice on the subway. But something inside her had needed to hear Ethan speak the words. Not to beg, not to grovel, just to tell the truth. And he had. It didn't erase the betrayal, it softened the edges. It gave her back a piece of herself that had been taken the night she found that message thread. The girl who believed in love, not blindly, not foolishly, but with cautious hope. She reached into her coat and pulled out the note he had once written, the one she hadn't burned, though she thought about it more than once. "I loved you too late to deserve you, but I'm trying now." She traced the words with her thumb. Maybe trying meant something. Maybe trying was enough to start again. Not in romance, not yet, but in truth, she whispered to herself, barely audible over the breeze. "Keep trying, Ethan." Then she stood up, the rose still in her hand, and walked toward whatever came next. The diner hadn't changed. The same faded red booths, the humming jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since 2014, the sticky counter that no amount of scrubbing could polish to a shine. But it was home in a way no place else had ever been for Claire. Not even the cramped apartment she used to share with her father and siblings. And now, as she wiped down the counter with rhythmic swipes, trying to focus on the mundane instead of the ache still blooming inside her chest, a familiar voice echoed behind her. "You missed a spot." Claire froze. Her hand stopped mid-swipe, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, cautiously, she turned. Ethan stood by the doorway, holding a rag in one hand, his coat slung over his shoulder. He looked older somehow, heavier, not in years but in soul. The cocky gleam was gone. In its place was something raw, uncertain, and heartbreakingly real. "I figured I'd help out," he said softly, walking toward her. "Seems like you could use a second pair of hands." Her heart was doing. She handed him a spare cloth without a word. For the next few minutes, they cleaned side by side in silence, just like they used to, like the night he first offered to help her after the late shift. Before the lies, before the bet. The air was thick with unspoken memories. He glanced at her from time to time, but she kept her focus on the tables. Finally, he broke the silence. "I still remember the first night I met you here," he said, wiping down the far booth. "You were balancing 3 plates, a tray of drinks, and telling off a man who tried to dine and dash. I thought, there's fire in her. She could burn down the world if she wanted to." Claire let out a soft exhale. It was almost a laugh. Almost, she smiled. Just a flicker. But he saw it. I lied to you, Claire, he continued, his voice growing heavy. But that night, that wasn't a lie. The moment I saw you, I knew I was in trouble. I just didn't understand what kind. Claire finally turned to him. Her eyes searched his not for the polished charm of a millionaire, but for something human. Honest. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. The same kind they used to scribble on during slow shifts. Little notes, doodles, inside jokes. He slid it across the table they used to share. The booth near the window. Claire opened it. Scrawled in shaky penmanship were the words, "Will you marry me? This time with no lies." Her fingers trembled as she held the napkin. She stared at it for what felt like eternity. Then she looked up. Ethan's eyes weren't pleading. They weren't begging. They were simply open, vulnerable, waiting. "No ring," she whispered. He gave a soft shrug. "I didn't want to come with anything shiny. No symbols. Just this place. Just us." Her voice cracked. "Why here? Because this is where I fell in love with you," he said, "but in some penthouse or at a gala. Here, where you rolled your eyes at me and served burnt coffee. Where you taught me how to be someone worth loving." She folded the napkin slowly and held it to her chest. The silence between them said more than words could. "I'm not perfect," he continued. "I might never be, but if you give me one more chance, just one. I spend the rest of my life proving you weren't a fool for loving me." Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks. She didn't brush them away. Instead, she reached for his hand under the table, the way they used to during midnight breaks. Her fingers slid into his. Their palms touched. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. No cameras, no spotlight, just them. The poor girl and the man who pretended to be someone else, trying to rebuild from ashes. The diner door creaked open. It was Tony, the owner, carrying a bag of supplies. He stopped mid-step when he saw them sitting together in the booth. Claire wiping her eyes, Ethan holding her hand. "Well, I'll be," Tony said, a slow smile forming. "Looks like this place just got lucky." Claire laughed, wiping her tears. Ethan chuckled too, the first genuine laugh he'd let out in weeks. Tony walked past them toward the kitchen, but paused and looked back over his shoulder. "You two always made sense, even when you didn't." Claire looked at Ethan. "That's what this is going to be, isn't it? A lot of trying to make sense?" He nodded. "Every day," she whispered. "Okay." He blinked. "Okay?" She nodded, smiling through tears. "Yes, okay. But you're washing dishes tonight." Ethan grinned. "With pleasure, Mrs. Vance." "Not yet," she teased. "Let's just start with coffee and forgiveness." He stood and moved to the back counter, grabbing 2 mugs, pouring one for her and one for himself. As he handed her the cup, he said, "No lies, no bets, just us." Claire held the cup, breathing in the familiar scent. Her heart, once broken, felt stitched together with thread made from truth and time. In that little booth under the flickering neon sign, surrounded by the clatter of pans and the smell of burnt toast, they made a vow far more sacred than any ring could carry. A vow spoken in silence, in shared glances, in healing. The kind of vow that said, "We broke, but we chose to mend." That was home. The next morning, the diner opened to its usual quiet class, all regulars reading newspapers, the coffee pot hissing behind the counter, and the smell of bacon wafting through the air. But something had changed. Claire and Ethan stood behind the counter, side by side. She handed him a worn apron. "Let's see if those billionaire hands can handle a stack of dirty dishes." Ethan took the apron with mock solemnity. "Accept the challenge, boss." They both laughed. Genuine, easy. It felt foreign, yet right. As he rolled up his sleeves and started washing dishes in the back, Claire moved through the space like she always had, taking orders, checking in on her favorite tables, but with a noticeable lightness in her step. Her coworkers watched in subtle disbelief. It wasn't every day a man like Ethan Vance scrubbed grease-stained plates and smiled doing it. At one point, he popped his head out from the kitchen. "Hey Claire, the hot water's out again." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Try kicking the pipe under the sink, gently." He disappeared, and then a loud clang, followed by a splash, echoed. She called out without turning. "Gently," I said. Laughter rippled across the diner. Customers chuckled. Even Tony looked up from his ledger, shaking his head. Ethan returned, soaked at the waist, his hair a mess, holding a dripping dish towel like it had betrayed him. It kicked back, he deadpanned. Claire tossed him a towel. "You'll survive." He dried off, but before retreating, his voice dropped. Softer now. "Thank you for letting me come back." She didn't respond with words. She just looked at him for a beat too long, then nodded, and somehow that was enough. As the shift ended, Claire leaned over the counter, arms folded, watching Ethan slowly wipe down a booth. His every motion was deliberate, respectful, no longer a man pretending to be someone else, but a man trying to be better. Tony approached quietly. "He's got no clue how to clear a grill, does he?" Claire smiled. "None. Burned the toast twice." Tony nudged her gently, but he showed up. That hit her in a way she hadn't expected. So few people in her life had truly shown up. Her father tried his best before the accident. Her mother, well, she left before Claire hit high school. But Ethan, he showed up, not with money, not with gifts, but with rolled-up sleeves and sore hands and a soaked shirt. Later that night, the diner closed. The chairs were flipped, the floors mopped, and the sky outside had turned an indigo blue. Claire and Ethan sat once again in their napkin with the proposal still tucked safely in her apron pocket. "This place is quieter at night," Ethan murmured, sipping coffee. "It always is," Claire replied. "It's when the ghosts come out." He tilted his head. "Ghosts? Of days that nearly broke you, of choices you wish you'd made differently, of all the versions of yourself you had to let go." Ethan nodded. Slowly, "Then I've got a whole haunted mansion in my chest." Claire reached for his hand again, just like before, but this time she laced her fingers through his and held tight. "What now?" he asked quietly. "We take it slow, no grand gestures, no fairy tale endings, just us, one sunrise at a time." He turned toward her. "I can do that," she smiled. "Good, because you're on morning shift tomorrow," he groaned playfully. "Cruel." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Fair." For a long time they just sat there, no need to speak. The rain tapped gently on the windows. The glow from the neon sign outside flickered and buzzed, but inside something whole and still settled between them. Forgiveness, real, earned, and raw. As Ethan helped her lock up, he turned one last time to look at the diner. "It doesn't look like much from the outside," he said. "No," Claire agreed, "but inside, it knows how to hold broken things together." He met her gaze. "Kind of like you," she chuckled. "Careful, you're starting to sound like a poet." He stepped closer, brushing her hair gently from her face. "Maybe you bring that out in me." For the first time, she didn't pull away from that look in his eyes, the kind that held no performance, no games, just truth. Outside, under the soft yellow glow of the streetlight, he took both her hands in his. "Never really believed in second chances," Ethan said. "Now, standing here, with you, I think maybe second chances don't just fall into your lap, maybe they're built. One apology, one broken plate, one honest moment at a time." Claire swallowed hard. "Then let's build ours." Slowly. "No lies," he whispered. "No lies," she repeated. They leaned in, their foreheads resting against each other's. No kiss this time, just closeness, truth. In the distance, and in that quiet space between night and morning, two people who had once been strangers began again. Not with a grand ceremony, but with a promise that mattered more than any vow spoken in gold or silk. A promise written in the language of second chances. The sun rose gently over the quiet courtyard of the women's shelter. What was once a neglected backyard was now transformed with paper lanterns, white folding chairs, and strings of wildflowers. The scent of lavender and homemade cookies wafted through the air. A row of women, many of whom had been through storms of their own, sat in simple dresses, eyes glistening with quiet hope. They weren't just guests, they were part of the story now. Claire stood behind the curtain made of old linens, sewn together by the same women who had shared bunk beds and whispered dreams with her in sleepless nights. Her dress was simple, lace stitched by hand, no train, no veil, just her. Her heart beat like a drum, not with fear, but with knowing. Today wasn't a fairy tale, it was better, it was real. Her father adjusted the collar of his thrifted jacket, his hand trembling as he offered her his arm. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. Claire smiled through a sheen of tears. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The music was nothing more than a woman strumming a guitar and humming gently. As Claire stepped onto the path of worn grass, the guests rose. Every step she took was a vow to herself. "I choose this. I choose healing. I choose him, not because he's perfect, but because he stayed." Andrew waited, under the wooden arch, built from reclaimed doors by the shelter's groundskeeper. His shirt was untucked, no tie, his curls slightly windswept. But his eyes never wavered. When he saw her, everything else He had never seen someone so beautiful, not because of her dress or the way the sun hit her skin, but because she had survived everything and still believed in love. Claire reached him. Her father handed her hand to Ethan's, patting it gently before stepping back. There were no bridesmaids or groomsmen, just the two of them, surrounded by people who had once lived invisible lives. They didn't exchange traditional vows. Instead, Claire pulled out a folded letter from her pocket. Her hands shook, but her voice was clear. "I didn't plan for you. You were the bruise I didn't expect, and the balm I didn't know I needed. You broke me," she said, her voice trembling, "but then you waited while I healed. You never rushed my pain, you didn't pretend to fix it. You just sat in the silence with me, and in that quiet, I found love." She folded the letter slowly, tears spilling, but her smile never faded. Ethan reached into his coat and unfolded his letter. His voice was thick with emotion. "I never knew love until it meant being willing to lose you. Until I realized that winning the bet was the worst thing I'd ever done, and losing you was the best thing I'd never let happen. You turned my shame into service, my ego into purpose. You made me human, and I want to spend every day proving I can be worthy of the home I've found in you." There was no "I do." Instead, Claire leaned forward and whispered, "We already did." Laughter bubbled through the crowd. Someone sniffled. The wind stirred the petals at their feet. The shelter's director stepped forward and said the only words that mattered. "You may now begin again." The kiss was soft, sacred. A promise. Instead of a grand reception, there were mismatched picnic tables with homemade food. The children from the shelter chased each other around the garden. One little girl climbed into Claire's lap and handed her a daisy. "You're the prettiest bride I ever saw," she whispered. Ethan knelt beside them, his hand gently brushing Claire's cheek. "They said we wouldn't make it." Claire looked at him, "And now we're feeding hope to kids who might never have believed in love." Across the yard, Olivia's face was nowhere to be seen. Ethan had made sure of it. She was now facing her own reckoning in court, and he'd finally shut the door on that chapter. As the sun dipped lower, Claire and Ethan made their way inside. In the entry hall, a new plaque hung beside the staircase, freshly installed the night before. The Claire Fund, empowering women with second chances. Ethan gently traced the letters with his finger. The fund offered job training, shelter expansion, and a legal clinic for survivors of abuse and exploitation. Claire had designed the program herself. Ethan had funded it, but she had breathed life into it. Sign of what it was. "You know, there's actually something here," he said. "It's not your name on the wall," he replied. "It's your courage." She leaned her head on his shoulder. Evening, as the sky turned to lavender, they returned to the diner. The same one where it all began. Inside, it hadn't changed much. Same cracked vinyl booths, same sticky menus. But tonight, it felt like holy ground. Claire pulled a photo from her purse. It was their wedding photo, taken by one of the women with an old Polaroid. In it, they weren't perfectly posed. Ethan was laughing, his forehead against hers. Claire's eyes were closed and her smile was pure joy. She framed it in a cheap wooden frame and hung it on the wall near the register. Customers came and went, some pausing to look. Under the photo, she nailed a brass plaque into the wall. It read, "Love doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with truth." Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You sure you want this here?" he asked. Claire nodded. "This is where it started. This is where I learned what love isn't, and where I learned what it could be." He kissed the side of her neck, then whispered, "Then let's keep building it." Brick by brick, they sat in the booth by the window, sipping coffee, no longer in a rush. Outside, the neon sign flickered. A young waitress, no older than Claire had been, wiped down the next table, smiling at them. Claire reached across the table, lacing her fingers through Ethan's. "You know what I used to think about when I was dead on my feet, working double shifts? That love was a luxury, something for girls who had time to be fragile. And now?" Claire looked around, at the framed photo, at the shelter in the distance, at Ethan. "Now I know love is a fight, but it's also the safest place to fall." Claire pressed the last pushpin into the wall, straightening the framed photo until it hung perfectly. The image inside was soft, sepia-toned. In it, Claire and Ethan were mid-kiss, under strings of fairy light, surrounded by nothing more than garden roses, folding chairs, and people who had known real pain and real healing. Behind them in the image, A wooden crossbeam bore hand-painted words from the ceremony. "You waited while I healed." It wasn't grand, but it was honest, and honest was what they had become. Wall of the diner had changed. What used to be an empty space above the coffee machine now held snapshots of new beginnings. A group of women in hairnets learning to bake. A young mother hugging her daughter after completing her job training. A man in a suit shaking Ethan's hand. An ex-convict now working as a mentor through the Claire Fund. Ethan walked in quietly, holding a small box in his hand. Claire glanced back and smiled. Her eyes, once guarded and dimmed by pain, now shimmered with the steady light of someone who had survived and chosen joy anyway. "You hung it?" he asked, approaching her side. "Of course, it belongs here," Claire replied, brushing her fingers along the edge of the frame. "This is where it started." Ethan opened the box. Inside was a new plaque, etched in brass with warm golden lettering. He handed it to her without a word. Claire read aloud, her voice catching, "Love doesn't begin with perfection, it begins with truth." Her throat tightened. "I want to hang it next to the register," Ethan said softly. "So every customer sees it. So every girl who walks in here tired, broken, and doubting herself remembers that her story can still change." Claire nodded, and that even a man who begins with lies can become the one who walks beside her in truth. They both looked around the diner. The same squeaky stools, same smell of brewed coffee and syrupy pancakes. But it felt different now. Not just a workplace, not just a relic of survival, but a landmark of who they had become. Outside, Claire's father pushed open the door, his cane clicking gently on the floor. He smiled as he approached, eyes filled with the weight of history and the pride of having walked his daughter down the aisle. "Your mama would have liked this," he said, tapping the side of the photo frame. "Not the kiss part, she'd have scolded you for that. But the rest, especially the strength," Claire chuckled, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Her father shook his head. "I was never worried. I just needed the right fool to stumble into your life." Ethan laughed quietly. Guilty. In the months that followed, the Claire Fund grew. What started as a single program with 5 women now reached multiple cities. Donors came, volunteers came, but what mattered most were the stories. One woman, a single mom fleeing abuse, got her GED and was accepted into college. Another, fresh out of prison, now ran her own food truck. All of them credited a moment letter, a quiet job interview, a hand reached across a cracked table. Claire still worked part-time at the diner. She said it kept her humble. Ethan respected that, though he often found himself wiping tables beside her when he was supposed to be on investor calls. Their life was simple, by choice, and rich in the ways that counted. One chilly afternoon, as the sky turned gold behind the diner's windows, Claire sat at a table with a young girl no older than 16. Her clothes were thin, her eyes too tired for someone so young. "You okay?" Claire asked gently. The girl shrugged. "I messed up. I was in a shelter, but I ran. I thought I could do it on my own." Claire nodded slowly. "Me too. I thought trusting anyone meant getting hurt." The girl stared. "You seem happy now?" "I am," Claire said. "But it didn't come from waiting for someone perfect. It came from healing myself first. And letting someone in, someone who was willing to break too, and build again." Claire reached into her apron and pulled out a card. "Come by the shelter tomorrow. We'll get you food, maybe a job shadow. You don't have to say yes right now. Just keep it." The girl looked at the card like it was made of gold. "Why are you helping me?" Claire smiled softly. "Because someone once held a door open for me when I thought they'd slam it in my face." Later that night, Claire and Ethan walked home in silence, their hands entwined. The moon hung low, and the stars, a handful through the city haze, glimmered like pieces of an old dream coming true. "I never asked you," Ethan said as they neared their apartment. "If you ever regretted saying yes again?" Claire stopped walking. She turned to him, her fingers brushing along the collar of his coat. "I regretted it every day, that I didn't say it sooner." And with those words, she leaned into him, forehead against his chest, heart steady against his. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, closing his eyes. They had broken once, shattered even, but the beauty of their story wasn't the fall. It was the slow, patient, and painful journey of rising again. Together. Back at the diner, as the last customer paid their bill and the night cleaner mopped the floors, the camera lingered on the photo of their wedding kiss. The room faded into quiet. the plaque beneath the frame catching a glint of overhead light. Love doesn't begin with perfection, but we get it with truth. And for Claire and Ethan, that truth was everything.